Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 842, and today is October 2nd, 2025. I'm the host of the show, Kyle Anzalone. Tons of news to get through on today's show, but first need to mention the sponsor of today's program, and that is the Expat Money Summit 2025. This is a fantastic annual online event, so no need to travel, put on by Mikhail Thorpe and his team over at the Expat Money Show. They do fantastic work helping people craft their perfect plan B. Can you move abroad and reduce your tax burden? How to get a second passport, and where can you move abroad and own property? All those questions and more will be answered at the Expat Money Summit. Now, this conference is coming up next week, October 10th through the 12th. And so you want to reserve your tickets for the event now, and you could get a free ticket to the event just by going to expatmoneysummit.com. Now, if you want some extra offers, if you want some extra panels, including the VIP panel that I will be on, get your VIP ticket to the event using promo code Kyle, K-Y-L-E, when you check out. Now let's jump into today's show. Just a reminder, we'll be talking about articles I wrote for several websites on today's show, including antiwar.com, judgenap.com, and the Libertarian Institute. Best place to follow all my work, this show, the Kyle Anzalone Show, is by following me on at Kyle Anzalone _. All right, first story up here today is one by our friend Dave DeCamp over at antiwar.com. Federal judge rules Trump administration's push to deport critics of Israel is unconstitutional. A federal judge in Boston ruled on Tuesday that the Trump administration violated the Constitution with its effort to deport critics of Israel and affirmed that non-citizens in the U.S. legally have the same right to free speech as Americans. And so this is what District Judge William Young wrote. This case, perhaps the most important ever to fall within the jurisdiction of this court, squarely presents the issue whether non-citizens lawfully present here in the United States actually have the same free speech rights as the rest of us. This court answers the constitutional question unequivocally, yes, they do. And of course, that's been the case all along. We all knew it, that when the Trump administration was doing this, that it was unconstitutional. Not only that, it's a real slap in the face against what America First is supposed to be. And the reason for this isn't because this is giving people who are here legally the same rights as Americans, but because that this was all about censoring and tamping down on criticisms of Israel. You know, it would be one thing if the Trump, I wouldn't support it anyways, but it would be far more understandable if the Trump administration was focusing on deporting migrants who were here criticizing the United States of America. But that we're only deporting people criticizing Israel is an Israeli first policy and one that should be opposed. All right, next up here, this article that I wrote for the Libertarian Institute. I've been trying to cover the situation in Haiti as it unfolds, and particularly the U.S. role in the foreign military presence in that country over the past, 2 years now, maybe 2.5 years now. I've written 36 articles on Haiti, and this is the latest. UN approves ramping up U.S.-sponsored force in Haiti. So the UN Security Council voted to drastically increase the Kenyan-led military operations in Haiti. Washington pushed for the UN to deploy to Port-au-Prince to take control from gangs and hand it back to the U.S. Haitian government. So on Tuesday, the Security Council approved expanding the Multinational Security Support Mission, or the MSS, to 5,500 troops. The U.S. and Panama sponsored the resolution. 12 members of the Security Council voted to expand the force, while Russia, China, and Pakistan abstained. As permanent members to the UNSC, Beijing or Moscow could have vetoed and killed the resolution, but did not. The expanded role of the MSS will enable the enable the international forces to make arrests without requiring coordination with the Haitian police or military. The UNSC was initially approved a force of about 1,500 troops, which were mostly Kenyan soldiers, in 2023. The Biden administration pressed the body to approve the MSS mission. Kenyan soldiers began arriving in Haiti in 2024. The U.S. has provided arms, funding, and training for the MSS operation. Washington additionally signed a new defense pact with Nairobi to incentivize Kenya to send its troops to Haiti. However, the MSS has created more chaos in Port-au-Prince when then Prime Minister Ariel Henry traveled to Nairobi to sign an agreement allowing Kenya to send troops to Haiti. Games expanded their control over Port-au-Prince, and Henry was forced to resign. After the Biden administration installed a new government in Haiti, this one led by Conley, Gaines continued to seize more territory. In April, Human Rights Watch reported that the Haitian government only controls about 10% of Port-au-Prince. Some Haitians have opposed foreign troops deploying to Port-au-Prince. UN peacekeepers have a dark legacy in Haiti, including rampant sexual abuse, torture, murder, and causing a cholera outbreak that killed about 10,000 people. And while the MSS doesn't officially call itself a UN peacekeeping mission, everybody knows that's effectively what it is. I don't think you're fooling the Haitians because the Kenyans are in fatigues and not the UN blue helmets. Haiti descent into chaos accelerated after the assassination of President Jovenel Moïse in 2021. Following the president's murder, the Biden administration installed Henry into power. The current Haitian government, now led by Gary Conley, has sought assistance from American mercenaries. Earlier this year, the New York Times reported that Blackwater founder Eric Prince is now operating armed drones in Haiti. Earlier this month, a drone strike by the Haitian government anti-gang task force. So it was unclear to me if this drone was operated by Haitian forces or by one of the mercenary forms, but the drone strike killed 8 children. And so, as we initially said, very concerning, and it doesn't seem like there's any real cause to investigate or get to the bottom of what's going on here. Another one by Dave DeCamp. Top Trump officials intensify push for regime change in Venezuela. Senior Trump administration officials have intensified their push to remove Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro from power and are discussing steps to escalate the military pressure, the New York Times reported on Monday. The report said the effort is being led by Secretary of State Marco Rubio, no surprise there, who also serves as the president's national security advisor. Other top officials on board with the regime change in Venezuela include CIA Director John Ratcliffe and Stephen Miller, Trump's chief domestic policy advisor. The report cited Venezuelan opposition figures who say their movement has been planning to do if Maduro is ousted, and that Rubio met with 5 opposition figures who fled to the U.S. back in May. During the first Trump administration, the U.S. backed a failed coup against Maduro, led by opposition figure Juan Guaido. And this is what we had warned about when Marco Rubio became Secretary of State, was that he would try something like this. It would seriously escalate the situation in Latin America and potentially attempt a regime change against Maduro. Our worst fears coming true there. All right, moving on to Ukraine. This one I wrote for the Institute on September 29th. The Kremlin threatens to attack U.S. troops who help Ukraine fire Tomahawk missiles into Russia. So on the last show, we covered that the Trump administration is considering giving Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine, and now we got the Russian response. Russian officials warned Washington that U.S. troops assisting Ukraine using Tomahawk missiles would become targets. The remarks were a response to Vice President J.D. Vance, who said the White House is considering sending long-range munitions to Kiev. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov questioned what role the Americans would have in assisting the Ukrainians firing the Tomahawk missiles. The question is this: who can launch these missiles? Only Ukrainians launch them, or do American soldiers have to do that? Who is determining the targeting of these missiles, the American side or the Ukrainians themselves? And it's important to note that the 2023 Discord leaks revealed that there were 100 U.S. soldiers in Ukraine, along with approximately 100 soldiers from several European nations. So the head of the Russian State Duma's Defense Committee explained that American troops could become targets if they assist Ukraine in attacking Russia with Tomahawk missiles, adding, "No one will protect them, not Trump, not Kellogg, nor anyone else." The threats from Moscow follow several aggressive statements from Washington and Kiev. Trump claimed on Truth Social that Ukraine was in position to win the war and the Russian military was a paper tiger. Then President Zelensky called for the U.S. to give Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine and threatened to attack the Russian leadership. Vance and Trump's envoy to the conflict, Keith Kellogg, gave some legitimacy to Zelensky's remarks by explaining that the White House was considering allowing Europe to buy Tomahawk missiles for Ukraine. Kellogg went on to argue that Ukraine should be allowed to conduct strikes deep inside Russian territory, use the ability to hit deep. There are no such things as sanctuaries. Tomahawks have a range of about 1,500 miles. Peskov downplayed the impact that the missiles would have on the conflict. He said, even if it happens that the United States sends Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine, currently there is no cure-all that could be a game changer on the front lines for the Kiev regime. No magical weapons exist, and Tomahawks or other missiles simply won't be a game changer. I think that is ultimately correct when it comes to the war in Ukraine. However, I do worry that it's really going to exacerbate the tensions between Russia and the West, and could take us over into a hot war between NATO and Russia. All right. Next up here, another one I wrote for the Institute, this one published on October 1st. Europe plans a $165 billion loan for Ukraine using frozen Russian funds. Moscow vows response. The European Union is planning to provide Ukraine with a $165 billion loan to support the war effort. The loan will be backed with Russian assets frozen by Western nations. The Kremlin stated that the EU scheme amounted to theft and pledged a response. Under the plan, European nations would lend Ukraine $165 billion. Kiev would not have to begin repaying until Ukraine receives war reparations from Russia. It's unlikely Moscow will make post-war payments to Kiev unless Russia loses the war, which isn't going to happen. The EU holds about $200 billion in frozen Russian assets. Some nations have already tapped into those funds to send arms to Ukraine. So, I think there's a lot of moving parts here and some of it to still be worked out. But my understanding is that this loan would not necessarily use those frozen Russian funds, at least initially. They have talked about in the past using the interest off of the frozen Russian funds to then pay down some of the payments on those loans, although that doesn't seem like you're going to maybe have a balance in the long term enough to actually pay off those loans just using the interest from the frozen Russian assets. But it does seem that the long-term plan is that once this war is over, they would use that money to repay these loans. So the Danish Prime Minister explained that the bloc is making progress in implementing the planned loan. However, legal hurdles remain, and some members of the European Union are hesitant to implement the scheme. Additionally, the European Central Bank is concerned that using frozen Russian assets will hurt the credibility of the euro. Europe sees the loan as necessary to fund the proxy war against Russia and Ukraine. Ukrainian President Zelensky has said the war will cost $120 billion next year alone, and Kiev can only pay for about $60 billion of that. Previously, Washington paid for the bulk of the Western military aid to Kiev, but President Donald Trump has demanded that Europe arm Ukraine by buying American weapons. The European Commission's president stated that the loan was necessary to continue funding the war. And this is a statement from EU President Ursula von der Leyen. We need more structured solution for military support. This is why I have put forward the idea of reparation loan that is based on the immobilized Russian assets. Russia responded sharply to the EU scheme. This is from Kremlin spokesman Peskov. We are talking about plans for illegal seizure of Russian property. In Russia, we call that simply theft. The boomerang will very seriously hurt those who are the main depository countries that are interested in investment attractiveness. And so he's making kind of the same point that Putin has in the past, that this is going to lead to a regionalization of the world economy, where you're either going to be a part of the Western Bloc and the US-led world economy, or you're going to be a part of likely a Chinese-led bloc through the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And Russia will be like kind of a double A or maybe like a B league player in all of this. They're probably not going to lead the alternative world economic order, but will likely have a major say in it. So the head of the Russian State Duma International Affairs Committee said European bureaucrats are nothing but thieves who finance Zelensky's terrorist regime. They will answer in court for every euro cent. They will return everything to Russia. The Kremlin has moved towards retaliatory seizures of Western assets in Russia to recoup the money taken from Russian accounts in the EU. Last year, the finance ministry claimed Russia has about the same value in Western assets as the West has in frozen Russian funds. And so if Russia does go forward with that, again, this is more fracturing of the world economy and making it harder to kind of reintegrate with Russia once this is all over. Next up here, this one I wrote for September 30th at the Libertarian Institute. Poland arrests Ukrainian man allegedly involved in Nord Stream pipeline bombings. So a second man has been arrested for his alleged role in the Nord Stream pipeline bombings that occurred in September of 2022. Investigative journalist Seymour Hersh reported that the sabotage attack was conducted by the Biden administration using U.S. divers. And so we basically have three narratives here. The first is the immediate one we got in the United States from our political leadership, the Joe Biden administration, and the mainstream media, which was Russia did it. You don't need proof. Russia did it. Russia's evil. We know Russia did it because Russia's evil. Putin's evil. Russia's evil. This was definitely Russia. Don't guess it. Don't ask for evidence. Russia, Russia, Russia. That turns out not to be true. Even the Western nations have dumped that idea, and they've now picked up on and have alleged that what really happened was it was the Ukrainians who did this, and it was a group of Ukrainians acting outside of the Ukrainian government who rented a yacht, planted the explosives, and blew up the Nord Stream pipelines. Seems a little bit unlikely to me, but I can't say for sure that's not the case. That's what this man and another man, they were arrested in Poland and Italy, have been accused of, and I believe they are denying the charges. They are certainly fighting their extradition back to Germany, where the trial is being held. And then, of course, the third scheme that was proposed or reported on was by Seymour Hersh, who spoke with sources in, I believe, the U.S. government, who said that the Joe Biden administration directed the bombing. And Hersh pointed to threats from President Biden and former State Department official Victoria Nuland that the U.S. would take action against Nord Stream, and, provided details, divers, and things like that on how this whole attack occurred. Certainly seems to be the most evidence for Hersh's narrative of events so far, although I don't think we could say that's been conclusively proven either. All right, next up here, this one from Dave DeCamp, antiwar.com. War Department pushes to double or quadruple missile production to prepare for potential war with China. So the War Department is pushing the U.S. weapons makers to double or even quadruple production of missiles to help the U.S. military prepare for a potential future war with China, the Wall Street Journal reported on Monday. Unsurprising that they're pushing this. They've been pushing to ramp up the U.S. military-industrial base really since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, realizing we didn't even have enough arms to send Ukraine what they would need to fight against Russia. And so now we're trying to ramp up for multiple conflicts. It seems just too much to ask and likely won't happen, although it will be a boon for the military-industrial complex who will cash in on this. All right, so next up here, North Korea tells UN that it will never give up nuclear weapons. In an address to the UN General Assembly, a top North Korean official explained that Pyongyang will never agree to give up its nuclear weapons. The US has demanded that denuclearization be a part of any agreement with North Korea. Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs Kim Song-gong said the imposition of denuclearization on the DPRK, which is Democratic People's Republic of Korea or North Korea, is tantamount to demanding it is to surrender its sovereignty and right to existence and violate the Constitution. We will never give up nuclear, which is our state law, national power, policy, and sovereignty power, as well as the right to existence. Under any circumstances, we will never walk away from this position. The remarks follow similar statements by North Korean Supreme Leader Kim Jong-un and his sister Kim Yo-jong. Last week, Supreme Leader Kim said that he was open to talks with President Donald Trump if the U.S. dropped its demand for denuclearization. He said if the United States drops the absurd obsession with denuclearizing us and accepts reality and wants genuine peaceful coexistence, there is no reason for us not to sit down with the United States. Personally, I still have fond memories of U.S. President Donald Trump. And so I do think North Korea here is trying to open the door for diplomacy. I'm not sure the Trump administration is in a position to take them up on their offer, as Marco Rubio recently doubled down and said that no, we have no plans to drop denuclearization demand when dealing with North Korea. All right, next up here, this one I wrote for the Libertarian Institute on September 29th. Netanyahu apologizes to Qatari Prime Minister for assassination attempt in Doha during Trump-mediated call. So President Donald Trump hosted a call between the leaders of two of America's Middle East allies on Monday. During the call, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu apologized to the Prime Minister of Qatar, Mohammed bin Abdulrahman, for an Israeli attack on Hamas leadership in Qatar. A White House readout of the call says the president expressed his desire to put the Israeli-Qatar relations back on a positive track after years of mutual grievances and miscommunications. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu expressed his deep regret that Israel's missile strike against Hamas targets in Qatar unintentionally killed a Qatari serviceman. He further expressed regret that in targeting Hamas leadership during the negotiations, Israel violated Qatari sovereignty and affirmed that Israel will not conduct such an attack again in the future. And so Trump seems to be working really hard to try to mend the fences between Israel and Qatar. Qatar, of course, hosts the largest airbase in the Middle East and has pledged a substantial amount of money to invest in the United States, and likely is probably targeting some of that towards people in the Trump orbit, making sure the appropriate pockets are lined. And additionally, they gifted Trump the nice plane, and so I think Trump doesn't want to break off relations with Qatar. He also doesn't want to go too hard on Benjamin Netanyahu, wants to maintain his reputation as the most pro-Israeli president in U.S. history, and so that's one of Trump's goals in all of this. I think I do want to mention that this is probably the most significant rebuke of Netanyahu during the Trump administration, not only to make Netanyahu make the call, but also there's a little, I think, a dynamic here where by making the statement public, probably caused Netanyahu some unnecessary humiliation that he would have rather avoided. My guess is Israel probably isn't too serious about the commitment to never attack Qatar again, but would, probably avoid doing so in the coming months, not to upset Trump too much after this. Now, because Trump is doing a lot to try to mend the ties here, Trump gives new defense commitment to Qatar following Israeli assassination attempt. President Trump signed an executive order pledging to treat any attack on Qatar as a threat to U.S. security. The vow comes as Trump tries to repair ties with Doha following Israel's failed assassination attempt of Hamas leadership in Qatar. So, the executive order signed on Monday explains the United States shall regard any armed attack against the territorial sovereignty or critical infrastructure of the state of Qatar as a threat to the peace and security of the United States. In the event of such an attack, the United States shall take all lawful and appropriate measures, including diplomatic, economic, and if necessary, military, to defend the interests of the United States and of the state of Qatar and to restore peace and stability. So this is meant to sound really good. I'm not sure it carries a whole lot of weight, really changes the way the U.S. would respond to Israel or even Iran, again, attacking Qatar. So I think this is mostly rhetorical, but it's interesting the kind of levels that the White House is going to try to mend fences with Doha following the Israeli assassination. It just goes to show that Israel's interests are not America's interest. This one here, September 29th, antiwar.com. Netanyahu claims ceasefire deal will allow Israeli military to stay in Gaza. I haven't spent a whole lot of time covering the ceasefire deal, in part because I don't think it's going to come into effect. We've seen time and time again that Israel doesn't want a ceasefire and will do just about anything, including killing the Hamas officials who are negotiating the ceasefire to prevent the ceasefire from being agreed to. I think it's very unlikely that it's going to be agreed to, but right after Trump comes out and says, oh, we're going to end the war, we'll see the Israeli withdrawal from Gaza if this ceasefire is implemented. Netanyahu is saying that Israeli forces are going to stay in Gaza. So again, undermining the president's attempt for negotiations. Next up here, new poll shows 40% of Americans believe Israel is intentionally killing civilians in Gaza. I wrote this one on September 29th. A new survey asking about the onslaught in Gaza found Americans continue to shift away from supporting Israel. A poll conducted by the New York Times and Senna found 40% of Americans believe that Israel is intentionally killing innocent Palestinians in Gaza, compared to just 16% who said Israel is not intentionally killing civilians. In the past 2 years, Israel has killed at least 66,000 people in Gaza, with experts believing that the actual death toll is in the hundreds of thousands. Data obtained by 972 magazine found that at least 83% of people killed by Israel in Gaza are civilians. Israeli soldiers have discussed intentionally targeting civilians. A sniper told Haaretz he was ordered to open fire on Palestinians seeking aid, including children. Additionally, 972 magazine reported that the IDF had a program dubbed Word Steady that called for waiting until suspected Hamas members returned home before bombing and killing the entire family. In December of 2023, only 22% of Americans believed Israel was intentionally killing civilians, so you could see that through the Gaza onslaught, that number has just about doubled. Additionally, the Times poll released on Monday found that more Americans, 36%, sympathize with the Palestinians versus 35% who side with the Israelis. That is a sharp reversal from October of 2023, when nearly half Americans sympathize with the Israelis compared to just 20% who sided with the Palestinians. So it's not just that 15% less Americans sympathize with the Israelis, but 15% more Americans sympathize with the Palestinians. The shifting views on how Israel is conducting the war has led more Americans to oppose sending military aid to Israel. 51% of Americans oppose continuing to provide Israel with weapons, while just 39% want Washington to continue sending billions in military assistance to Tel Aviv. The U.S. provides Israel with at least $3.8 billion in military assistance annually. In the year after the October 7th Hamas attack, Washington sent Tel Aviv over $20 billion in weapons. All right, moving on here to an update on the offensive in Gaza City. Israeli Defense Minister, Palestinians who remain in Gaza City will be considered terrorists. The Israeli Defense Minister touted the IDF's recent gains near Gaza City and said Palestinians who remain in the area will be considered terrorists. At least 500,000 Palestinians remain in the city. So, this is Defense Minister Israel Katz on X. This is the last opportunity for Gaza residents who wish to do so to move south and leave Hamas terrorists isolated in Gaza City itself, facing the IDF's ongoing operations at full force. Those who remain in Gaza will be considered terrorists and terror supporters. Last month, the IDF launched a ground operation to occupy Gaza City and issued evacuation orders for about 1 million Palestinians in the region. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians have fled the Israeli onslaught, but about 500,000 Palestinians remain. Some Palestinians have reported being unable or unwilling to leave Gaza City. The cost of transportation out of the city is exorbitant. Additionally, disabled and injured Palestinians do not have adequate transportation to flee. Katz said that the IDF had expanded the area around the city it controls, and now all Palestinians must pass through Israeli checkpoints, which my guess is going to make Palestinians a little bit less likely to flee, just because Israel does a lot of arrests at these checkpoints. So this seems like really bad. I wrote this for JudgeNap.com on October 1st. Israel begins arresting activists attempting to bring food into Gaza. So they are trying to shut down the flotilla. I think as of this morning, when I wrote the article, they had stopped at least 9 ships. I think this morning I read that the number was at least 14, but as high as 24. Although some ships, because there's about 50 ships in this flotilla, were getting close to Gaza and were within Israeli territorial waters. Most of the ships that were stopped last night were stopped in international waters, stopping the ships in illegal kidnapping. All right, this is another one I wrote for JudgeNap.com, October 1st. UN official: Israel killed over 100 Lebanese civilians since ceasefire. Israel has continued regular air raids in Lebanon following a ceasefire with Hezbollah in November. While Hezbollah has complied with the ceasefire, Israel has killed at least 100 Lebanese civilians. United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights Volker Turk reported that 103 civilians have been killed in Lebanon over the past 10 months. This is Turk's statements. We are still seeing devastating impacts of jet and drone strikes in residential areas, as well as near UN peacekeepers in the south. Today, families are simply unable to make a start on rebuilding their homes and their lives, and instead are faced by the real and present danger of more strikes. Hundreds of damaged schools, health facilities, places of worship, among other civilian sites, are still no-go or at best only partly usable. He noted that Hezbollah has killed no Israelis since the ceasefire was implemented. So under the terms of the ceasefire, Israel and Hezbollah agreed to stop cross-border attacks. Additionally, the Lebanese group agreed to withdraw its forces that are south of the Litani River, and Tel Aviv committed to withdrawing its forces from Lebanon. While Hezbollah complied with the ceasefire, Israel has continued its air raids and is refusing to withdraw its forces from Lebanon. Tel Aviv is now demanding that Beirut disarm Hezbollah entirely, or it will retain the occupation. And my guess is they keep the occupation either way. This is just, trying to extract more out of the situation. Last story up here today. Yemeni missile attack causes substantial damage to ship in the Gulf of Aden. So a missile launched by Ansar Allah in Yemen struck a Dutch flag cargo ship in the Gulf of Aden, causing injuries to the crew and damage to the ship. The ship's operator, Splittenhof, confirmed the attack on the Mein Vergat, and it said earlier today its general cargo vessel that was on passage in the Gulf of Aden in international waters has come under attack of an unidentified explosive device, inflicting substantial damage to the ship. And so this is just the Houthis enforcing their blockade of Israel, trying to punish the Israeli government for the genocide in Yemen. Of course, innocent sailors are being punished in all of this, and that's why, you got to oppose what Ansar Allah is doing here. At the same time, one of the most effective measures that any country is taking against the genocide in Yemen. All right, that's where I'll wrap it up there today. Thank you all so much for tuning in. I will be back with another episode of the Kyle Anzalone Show at 4:45 Eastern today, so be sure to tune in and check that out.